50 people watched her fall. Not one of them stood up. The man who caught her was not supposed to be in that room. He fixed the heating. He changed the bulbs nobody could reach. He carried the most powerful woman in the city down 11 floors while she stopped breathing against his shoulder, and the whole building got out of his way for the first time in 3 years. 4 hours later, a nurse handed him a clipboard. There was a line already filled in. Not by him. Neat, slanted, blue ink 4 months old, written on a night she came in alone at 3 in the morning and could not think of one name to write down. 6 words in the space where you name the one person who matters most. He read them twice, and then his hand started to shake. He had her in his arms before her body ever touched the floor. 50 people in that boardroom. 50. And not one of them moved. They sat there with their laptops open and their coffee going cold, and they watched the most powerful woman in Cleveland fold, like a coat slipping off the back of a chair. Emmett Rooker moved. I didn't decide to. His body was already crossing the marble before the thought caught up one arm going under her shoulders, the other under her knees, and then he was up and walking, and the door was banging against the wall behind him. Somebody call an ambulance. Nobody moved. Now. That got them. He carried her down the glass hallway. Everyone in that building was afraid to walk too loudly in past the frosted doors, past the reception desk where a young woman had both hands over her mouth. Her head was against his collarbone, and she weighed nothing, which was the thing that scared him most because a woman who runs a $2 billion company should weigh something. Hold the elevator. Nobody argued him. That was the strange part. For 3 years, Emmett Rooker had been furniture in that building, maintenance supervisor, the man who fixed the air handlers and unclogged the executive restrooms and changed the bulbs nobody else could reach. People walked past him the way you walk past a wall. Not today. Today the whole floor got out of his way. Inside the elevator, he pulled her in tighter and put his mouth close to her ear and dropped his voice down to something that was only ever meant for her. Come on, boss. Stay with me. Her eyelids fluttered. Just barely. That's it. That's it. Don't you quit on me. Now, before we go any further, before that elevator hits the lobby and the truck doors slam and this whole thing goes where it's going, you need to understand how these two people ever ended up in the same story, because on paper, they should never have exchanged more than 10 words in their entire lives. Emmett Rooker got up at 5, not 5:15, not 5:30 when the second alarm went. 5. Because a 9-year-old needs her lunch packed and her hair brushed and somebody to sign the field trip form that was due yesterday, and there was nobody else in that apartment to do it. His wife had been gone 4 years. Rosalind, Rose. She'd made it 14 months from the diagnosis which the oncologist had called merciful, and Emmett had nodded at the time because you nod at a man in a white coat. He'd thought about that word for 4 years since. Merciful. Her recipe box was still on top of the refrigerator. Green tin, handwriting on index cards, some of them splattered with something he'd never scrubbed off because scrubbing it off felt like a decision he wasn't ready to make. I didn't cook from it. He just liked knowing it was up there. Dad. Wren 9 years old at the kitchen doorway in mismatched socks, holding a permission slip like a subpoena. It was due Friday. It's Tuesday. I know. He signed it against the counter. She watched him do it with her whole face the way kids do, and then she said, Mrs. Pruitt says you look tired. Mrs. Pruitt says a lot of things. She says you're the tiredest man in this building. Eat your cereal. He drove a truck older than most of the interns at the company he worked for. 3 flannel shirts on rotation. Same lunch packed every single day, turkey mustard, no cheese, and apple he usually didn't eat. And he had one rule he'd taught his daughter one, and he'd taught it to her so many times she could say it in her sleep. They were in the elevator of the building one Saturday when he'd brought her to work with him, and a man in a suit had walked past a woman pushing a cart and said nothing. Not hello, not excuse me, nothing. Wren had watched it happen. "Read the name tag," Emmett said. "Then say the name. Everybody's got one baby. Everybody. And most people go their whole day without hearing theirs." She'd been 6. She'd never forgotten it. 4 floors up in the same building at almost the same hour, a woman named Adair Kerrigan was eating dinner. Dinner was cold coffee. She was 38 years old. She'd built Kerrigan Vantage out of nothing but nerve and a line of credit she'd had to beg for. And now it employed 900 people, and the business magazines put her on their covers with her arms folded and her jaw set, and behind her back they called her the Winter Queen. They thought she couldn't hear them. She heard everything. Her apartment on the 22nd floor looked like a showroom, because that's essentially what it was. Somebody else had chosen the furniture. Somebody else had hung the art, and Adair had signed the invoice without looking at it. There were no photographs in it. Not one. Nobody texted her to ask if she got home safe. Nobody had, in a very long time. 2 people, 4 floors apart, each one absolutely certain they were alone. Both of them wrong. It started because of a burst pipe. That's the whole thing. That's the entire origin of it. A 3/4-inch supply line let go in a storage room on the 4th floor at 9 o'clock at night, and Emmett Rooker stayed late to fix it, and by the time he was done and washed up, it was almost midnight. He took the executive elevator because it was the only one still running, and the doors opened on the top floor. Wrong floor. He hadn't pressed it. Old building, old wiring. A call button somebody had leaned on and forgotten about 6 hours earlier. The doors slid open on the executive floor, and the whole place was dark except for one light. Corner office. He should have let the doors close. Every single thing in 20 years of working buildings told him to let the doors close. He stepped out. His boots didn't make a sound on that carpet. He walked toward the light, and he told himself he was checking the fixture, which was a lie, and he knew it was a lie the whole time he was telling it. Then he was in the doorway, and Adair Kerrigan was sitting at that enormous desk with her head in her hands and her shoulders shaking. Not the pretty kind of crying, the other kind. The kind that comes out of a person when they have finally completely run out of the strength to hold it in, and they think there is nobody left in the world who could possibly walk through the door. Emmett stood there. Leave, he told himself. Leave right now. This is not yours. You are the guy who fixes the toilets, and she is the woman on the cover of the magazine in the lobby, and there is no version of this where stepping into that room is anything but the worst decision you have ever made. Except he'd stood in a hospital room 4 years ago and watched a woman he loved hold everything in so he wouldn't have to see it. And he'd let her. And he'd never forgiven himself for letting her. He knocked on the door frame. Her head snapped up, and in half a second, half her face rearranged itself. Wiped. Sealed. Professional. This floor is closed after 10. Yes, ma'am. You shouldn't be here. No, ma'am. Elevator opened wrong. I'll go. He turned. Wait. He stopped. She looked at him a long moment, and he watched her try to decide whether to be furious about this or not. Then quietly, almost like it got out before she could stop it, "Do I know you?" "Emmett, ma'am. Maintenance. I fixed the leak under your window last spring. The one dripping on your certificates." Something moved behind her eyes. "The one that ruined my diploma." "That one." He shifted his weight. "I ordered you a new frame. Better one. Waterproof backing this time." For a second, 1 second, the corner of her mouth almost did something. "You didn't have to do that." "No, ma'am." He shrugged. "It was bothering me." And then there was a silence. A different silence than the icy one from a minute before. And Emmett Rooker did the thing he could never afterward explain, not to her, not to himself, not to anybody. He looked at the paperwork stacked across that desk. He looked at the 2 dead coffee cups. He looked at the clock on the wall reading 11:52, and he said, "You eaten anything today, ma'am?" She blinked at him, like the question was in another language. "Excuse me, food. Have you eaten?" And she had to think about it. She actually had to sit there and think about it. "I don't remember." Emmett nodded slow, like that answer had just told him her entire life story, and none of it was good. "There's a diner 2 blocks down. Open all night. Guy named Otto runs it. Best grilled cheese in Ohio, and I'm not exaggerating for effect, ma'am. I'm being precise." He paused. "You should eat something. The company'll still be here in 20 minutes. Adair Kerrigan, who had fired people for less than this, who did not take suggestions, who had spent 15 years teaching the entire world that she needed absolutely. Nobody looked up at this tired man in a flannel shirt standing in her doorway at midnight. And her eyes filled again. "You're the first person in this building to ask me that in 3 years. Emmett's face didn't change. Something in his chest did. "That's a shame, ma'am," he said. "That's a real shame. Otto's had 11 stools and a griddle and a radio that only got AM. Otto Lindqvist himself was 70-something and enormous, and had opinions about everything. And when the 2 of them walked in at midnight, he looked at Emmett, then at the woman in the $4,000 coat, and said absolutely nothing about it. Which was why Emmett liked him. He put down 2 grilled cheese sandwiches. Adair looked at hers for a long moment, then she picked it up and ate the entire thing. She hadn't finished a meal in 6 weeks. That's how it started. Not with romance. Neither one of them would have used that word, not then, not for a long time. And if you'd said it out loud to either of them, they'd have laughed you out of the room. It started with a sandwich. And then it kept happening. Never planned. That part mattered to both of them, because planned would have meant admitting. He'd stay late. He'd see her light on. He'd knock. Sometimes she waved him off. Sometimes she didn't. 18 months. That's how long it went on. And here's what happened in those 18 months, and I want you to pay attention to how small these things are, because the small things are the entire story. He noticed she was always cold. So one Monday morning she came in and there was a space heater under her desk. Already plugged in, already warm, and a sticky note in blocky handwriting. "Turn off before you leave. Fire hazard. ER." He noticed she skipped lunch, so twice a week, a wrapped sandwich appeared in the executive break room fridge with her name on it, and nothing else. No note, no signature, just her name, in that same blocky print. He noticed the light over her reading chair had been out for a month, and nobody had bothered. So he fixed it. And he swapped the bulb for a warmer one, softer, because he'd read somewhere that warm light is easier on tired eyes. She never caught him. That was the point. But she knew. And she started doing things, too. I was on their phone in the stairwell one afternoon, not knowing that stairwell carries sound, straight up 4 floors to a landing where his CEO happened to be standing with a cup of coffee. No, I understand. I do. It's just, can I split it? Half now, half next paycheck. Silence. No, I get it. Policy's policy. Silence. Let me figure something out. Thank you. Sorry to be a problem. And he'd hung up and stood there with his hand over his eyes for about 4 seconds, and then he'd gone back to work. He never knew she heard. The next day, the school called to tell him an anonymous donor had covered the 4th grade supply fees, not just for Wren, for all 12 kids in her class. Emmett knew. Of course he knew. There was exactly one person in his life with that kind of money, and that kind of quiet. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. That was how they worked. But the next time he fixed something in her office, he left a note that just said, "She's got everything she needs now. Thank you. ER." She kept that note in her top desk drawer for a year. Here's the part you need to understand before this breaks in half. Both of them were falling. And both of them were absolutely categorically certain that the other one was not. Emmett would drive home some nights and say it out loud in the dark cab of that truck, out loud, like a man arguing with himself at a stoplight. "Look at yourself, Rooker." He'd catch his own reflection in the rear view. The gray coming in. The flannel. The 46 years. She runs a company. You fix her sink. And he decided somewhere around month 9, he made an actual decision that whatever this was, he would carry it alone. Quietly. Like everything else. He would be her friend. He would make sure she ate and slept and didn't work herself into a hospital bed. And he would never ever say one single word. Because a man like him saying a word to a woman like her would ruin the only good thing either of them had. And Adair had her reasons. Hers cut deeper. She'd sit alone in that apartment at night, in the silence she had spent her entire life constructing, and she would think about him, about the way he said her name like it was a normal name, about the fact that he was the only human being on Earth who asked whether she'd eaten. And then she'd remember the last time she let herself need somebody. And she would shut the whole thing down like a breaker box. Because Adair Kerrigan had a secret. A big one. A secret about who she used to be and what she'd signed and the man who still owned a piece of her because of it. But that's later. Verna Pruitt was 68 years old and lived across the hall, and had buried her husband 9 years ago in February, and she watched Wren after school and had opinions. Emmett came home one October evening, and she was sitting on the front steps in a cardigan the color of a traffic cone. "You're late." "Boiler." She didn't move over. He sat down on the step below her, which is where he always sat, which is a thing they'd never discussed. "The child says you smile funny." "What? When you talk about that woman at your work. She says your face doesn't know what to do." Emmett laughed. Once. Not happily. "Wren says a lot of things. Wren's the only one in this building paying attention." Verna let that sit. Then, "You're waiting for permission." "Verna, you are. You're waiting for somebody to walk up and hand you a piece of paper that says it's allowed now." She looked out at the street. "Rosalind's gone, Emmett. And you're still here. Those are 2 different things, and you keep treating them like one." He didn't answer. "That's all I'll say about it." It was not, in fact, all she would say about it. But it was all she said that night. Wren had a fever on a Monday. Low stubborn, the kind that doesn't scare you, but doesn't leave either. Emmett was up until 2 in the morning with a washcloth and a thermometer and a 9-year-old insisting she was totally fine, Dad, while shivering under 2 blankets. By 6, the fever had broken. Verna appeared at the door in a bathrobe and pointed at him. "Go to work. The child is fine. You look worse than she does." He almost stayed. That's the thing that would haunt him. If he had stayed home that Tuesday, he would not have been in that building. He would not have been on the executive floor. He would not have been anywhere near that room. But he went, because there was a thermostat acting up outside the boardroom, and that was the only reason he was on 11 that morning. A broken thermostat, and 3 floors up, Adair Kerrigan was putting on armor. She'd been sick for weeks, and she knew it, and she did not have the room in her calendar for it. There was a hostile acquisition on the table. There was a board that was half against her and getting worse. There was a presentation that would decide the next 5 years. So she did what she always did. She pushed it down. She ignored the dizziness. She ignored the chest pain she'd been having for 4 days. She ignored the way the edges of her vision had started going soft around 10 in the morning and stayed that way. She drank her coffee. She walked in to fight. Emmett was on a ladder in the hallway with the panel off the thermostat when he heard her voice through the glass. Sharp, in command, doing the thing she did. And then he heard it change. A word slurred. A sentence that stopped where no sentence should stop. He went still, screwdriver in his hand. Every nerve in his body suddenly awake for reasons his brain had not caught up to yet. He looked through the glass. She was standing at the head of that table, gripping the edge of it with both hands. Her color was wrong, gray under the makeup. And she was still talking, still pushing words out, and nobody in that room was looking at her. Not one of them. 12 of the most powerful people in the company, and every single one was looking at a laptop. I was off the ladder before he decided to be. He saw her knees start to go. He saw the glass in her hand begin to tip. He saw the exact moment her eyes rolled back. And Emmett Rooker, Maintenance 46-3 flannel shirts, the man they walked past, like a wall dropped the screwdriver, hit that door with his shoulder hard enough to crack it against the wall and cross 20 feet of marble in under 2 seconds. He caught her before she hit the floor, which is where we came in. The waiting room at Metro General was the longest, coldest place Emmett Rooker had ever been in his life, and he had been in some cold ones. They'd taken her out of his arms at the doors. A wall of people in scrubs, a gurney, a set of double doors swinging shut in his face. And then, nothing. Nothing to fix, nothing to hold. No wheel to grip and no washcloth to fold, and no child to reassure. Just a plastic chair and a vending machine, and a clock that seemed to be running backward. He couldn't sit. He tried. He got up. He paced. He sat down again and put his face in his hands. And he prayed, which he had not done, not really. Not once since a Tuesday 4 years ago, in a room upstairs in a building not 4 miles from this one. I wasn't even sure who he was talking to. He only knew what he was asking for, and he knew it was the same thing he'd asked for last time, and he knew how last time went. Please, not this one too. A nurse came through the doors with a clipboard, 50s, gray at the temples, reading glasses on a chain, the kind of calm that only comes from 20 years of walking into rooms like this one. "Are you family?" Emmett stood up so fast the chair skidded. "Is she okay? Is she?" "We're still evaluating." She looked at him over the glasses. "Sir, are you family?" He opened his mouth, and there it was, the wall, The same wall he'd been standing behind for 18 months. What was he? What was he supposed to say? Employee. Co-worker. The guy who fixes her heater. The man who leaves sandwiches in a refrigerator like a coward. His hands were shaking. I'm the one who brought her in. I'm her. The nurse's name tag said C. Wilder, and she had done this 10,000 times, and she could read a man's face the way other people read the weather. Are you her emergency contact? I don't know, Emmett said. And then, because it was true, and because he had nothing left in him to make it sound like anything but what it was, I don't know what I am to her, but I'm all she's got. I promise you that. There's nobody else coming. It's just me. Constance Wilder looked at him a long moment. Then she nodded. Then I need you to fill out what you can. She put the clipboard in his hands. Emmett sat back down, and his hand steadied because now he had a job, and his hands always steadied when there was a job. Name, date of birth, insurance he didn't know he'd find out, known conditions, allergies. He filled in what he could and left blank what he couldn't, and he told himself he'd get the rest from her when she woke up. Because she was going to wake up. She had to wake up. And then he got to a line near the bottom of the page, and it was already filled in. He hadn't written it. He hadn't written any of it. The handwriting wasn't his, it was neat and slanted, and he had seen it on 1,000 memos, and on one note that was folded in his wallet right now, right at that second, 3 inches from his heart. There was his name, Emmett Rooker, in her handwriting, listed as the person to call. He stared at it. She'd filled part of this out before, some other visit, some other night, and filed it away, and never thought about it again. I hadn't known. He hadn't known he was on a single piece of paper anywhere in any building in this entire city, as anyone's anything. But that wasn't the line that stopped his heart. The line that stopped his heart was the one directly beside his name. 3 words printed in small gray type, the kind of box that gets filled in 1,000 times a day by people writing spouse and son and sister, relationship to patient. And in that space in blue ink, in her careful slanted handwriting, Adair Kerrigan had written 6 words. 6. The person who made me believe I wasn't alone. That's what she wrote. 6 words in the box where you're supposed to put wife or brother or daughter. In the box where the hospital asks you in the plainest language a hospital knows how to use, who is this person to you? And Adair Kerrigan had not written employee. She had not written co-worker. She had not even written friend. Emmett Rooker read it 4 times. Not because he doubted his eyes. Because he doubted the world. Because for 18 months he had built an entire private architecture inside his chest around one single load-bearing belief that he was invisible to her, that he was furniture with a name tag, and that belief had just come out from under everything at once. And a man doesn't stay standing when that happens. So he didn't. He sat in a plastic chair under fluorescent lights that buzzed like something dying, and he put his face in his 2 rough hands, and he cried the way strong men cry. Quietly. Terribly. The way you cry when you have held it for so long that the holding has become the shape of you, and somebody comes along and gently takes the weight, and your arms don't know what to do anymore. A janitor at the far end of the hall stopped his cart, looked over, did not approach, because he knew that hallway, and he knew that chair, and he knew that particular set of shoulders, and he understood there is a kind of grief you do not walk toward. He turned the cart around and went the other way. Emmett didn't notice. Let me tell you what happens in a hospital waiting room at 4 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. Nothing. That's what happens. Nothing happens for hours with terrible efficiency. A vending machine hums. A television mounted in the corner plays a cooking show with the sound off. Somebody's grandson runs a toy truck along the base of a wall, and his mother says Danny in a voice with no energy left in it at all. And you sit there, and you count ceiling tiles. Emmett counted 42 before he made himself stop because counting them a second time would mean he'd been there long enough to count them twice, and he was not prepared to know that yet. He got up. He walked to the window at the end of the hall and looked out at a parking garage. 4 years ago, he had stood at a window almost exactly like this one in a building 4 miles north. Different hospital. Same architecture of waiting. There had been a coffee machine that took quarters and gave you something brown and hot that was not coffee, and he had drunk 11 of them over 9 days. And on the 9th day, a doctor came out and said Mr. Rooker in that particular tone, and Emmett had known before the man finished the second syllable. He put his forehead against the cold glass. Not this one, too. I'll do anything. I don't know what I'd do. What do I have to trade? I've got a truck and a 9-year-old and $4,100 in savings, and I would put every bit of it on the table right now if somebody would just come out that door and tell me she's breathing. Please. I've never asked you for anything twice. Behind him, the double doors opened. He turned so fast his shoulder hit the window frame. It wasn't for him. A family, a woman, and 2 grown sons stood up on the other side of the room, and a doctor started talking to them in a low voice, and one of the sons put his hand over his mouth, and Emmett looked away. Because you don't watch that. You never watch that. He sat back down. He picked the clipboard up off the chair, and he held it against his chest with both arms, the way you'd hold something that could blow away. Here's the thing about those 6 words. She hadn't written them that morning. She hadn't scribbled them in a hurry, with a nurse standing over her shoulder and a needle in her arm. Emmett turned the form over. There was a date stamp in the corner. 4 months old. 4 months. Which meant there had been a night some night in the spring. Some night while he was at home cutting the crusts off a sandwich and arguing with a 9-year-old about bedtime when Adair Kerrigan had come to this hospital. Alone. Chest pains. 3 in the morning. She'd driven herself. She had driven herself. A woman with a car service on retainer and a driver on call 24 hours a day had gotten into her own car at 3 in the morning, with her chest seizing up, and driven herself to an emergency room because calling the driver would have meant a person knowing. And she'd sat in a plastic chair. This chair. Maybe this exact chair. And they'd handed her a clipboard, and they'd asked her the simplest question a hospital asks. Who do we call if something happens? 38 years old. 900 employees. Her face on a magazine on a rack in the lobby gift shop 40 feet from where she was sitting. And she'd looked at that blank line, and she couldn't think of a single name. Not her mother. Not her father. Not a sister, because there wasn't one. Not a friend, because every person she knew was on her payroll, and you don't call somebody you sign the checks for and ask them to come sit with you at 3 in the morning. Emmett sat in that waiting room and thought about a woman staring at a blank line, and then writing his, because there was no word for it. There is no word in the English language for the man who leaves a heater under my desk and signs the note, Fire Hazard. There is no word for the only person in 900 who asks whether I ate. So she'd made one. 6 words long. And then she'd handed the clipboard back and gone home, and never thought about it again, because she was certain, absolutely certain, the way he'd been certain that nobody on this earth would ever read it. "Sir." He didn't hear her the first time. "Sir." Emmett lifted his head, and his face was wet, and he did not bother any more. He was done bothering. Constance Wilder was standing 3 feet away, and she was smiling. "She's awake." He was on his feet before he understood he'd stood up. His legs barely held. "She's asking for you. She's—" His voice came out as nothing. He tried again. "She's talking. First thing she did." The nurse's smile went wider, and it was real, and it had 20 years behind it. Opened her eyes and asked if the man who carried her in was still here. Emmett stared at her. "What did you tell her?" And Constance Wilder, 58 years old, 3 grandchildren, 10,000 clipboards handed to 10,000, shaking hands, said, "I told her he never left." The hallway smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee. She walked him down it, and Emmett walked beside her with that clipboard still in his hand because he had not once thought to put it down, and his heart was going so hard he could hear it in his ears. Because now, Rooker? You read something you were not supposed to read. That's what happened. You picked up a form, and you read a private thing. A private woman wrote on a private night, and now you're going to walk in there. And what? Hand it to her. Say nothing. Make small talk about the weather with this in your hand. You could put it in your pocket. You could put it in your pocket and never say one word and go on exactly like before. Heater, sandwich, light bulb. You are extremely, extremely good at doing that. Constance stopped outside a door. 2 minutes. Okay. She's stable. She's weak. She put a hand on his arm, and her grip was stronger than he expected. Don't get her worked up. Okay. And sir, he looked at her. 20 years I've done this job. 20. She glanced at the door, then back at him. Whatever the two of you have got going on, she's lucky to have somebody who runs into a room instead of out of one. She let go of his arm. That's rarer than you'd think. Emmett nodded. He didn't trust his voice. He pushed the door open. She was propped up in the bed, and she was smaller. That was the first thing. This woman took up an entire boardroom by walking into it, and in that bed she looked like a woman. Just a woman. Pale as the sheet, an IV taped to the back of her hand, and her hair was down around her shoulders, loose, which he had never once seen in 3 years because the Winter Queen did not have her hair down. She looked human, and when her eyes found him in the doorway, something crossed her face that she was far too weak to hide the way she always hid it. Relief. Naked, undefended relief. You're still here. Her voice was a rasp. Barely there. Where else would I be? He came to the side of the bed and stood there, big and useless, still in his work clothes, with the patch on his chest that said, Ed Rooker. You took about 10 years off me, boss. I'm sorry. She actually said it. Adair Kerrigan, who apologized to nobody, said it, and then said it again. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Hey. He pulled the plastic chair over with his foot and sat down close. You got nothing to apologize for. Your body just cashed a check your calendar's been writing for 18 months. That's all this is. She looked at the ceiling. Doctor talked to you yet? A little. What did he say? A pause. That I'm an intelligent woman making stupid choices. Something that wanted to be a smile. I told him he could put it on my headstone. Don't. It came out of him hard, harder than he meant, and she blinked at him, and Emmett looked down at his hands. Don't joke about that. Not today. I can't take it today. The room went quiet. The monitor beeped in its steady rhythm. And then her eyes moved down to his lap, to the clipboard, and Emmett watched the exact second she remembered what was on it. Her whole body went still. "Emmett." Her voice changed. "Is that the intake form?" He didn't answer. "Emmett." She was trying to sit up now, and the IV line pulled tight against the tape. "Give me that. Give me the—" "You already filled part of it out." He said it quietly, still looking down. "4 months ago, according to the stamp. You put me down as your contact." She stopped moving. "I didn't know that." He turned the clipboard over in his hands. 18 months, Adair. And I never knew I was on one piece of paper anywhere in this world with your name on it. I figured." He stopped, started over. "I figured I was the guy who fixed your heater. Emmett. And then I got to the bottom of the page." He looked up, and his eyes were wet, and he let them be. "There's a line. Asks how I know you. Relationship to patient." Her face had gone from pale to something worse. She looked like a woman watching a door swing open that she had nailed shut with her own 2 hands a long time ago. "Please don't. You didn't write employee. Emmett. You didn't write friend. Please. You wrote—" and his voice went out from under him. "Clean in half." He had to stop. He pressed his lips together and breathed in through his nose and made himself start again, and it took him 3 seconds, and those 3 seconds were the longest of his life. "You wrote the person who made me believe I wasn't alone." The monitor picked up. He heard it. Beep, 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 going faster, and her chest was rising too quick under the blanket, and he remembered what the nurse said, and he almost stopped. He almost took the whole thing back to keep her calm. Except he had been quiet for 18 months. Quiet in the stairwell, and quiet in the truck, and quiet at his own kitchen table. He had been so quiet for so long that quiet had become a thing he did instead of a thing that happened. And he was done. "Is it true?" She didn't answer. "Adair, look at me. Is that true what you wrote?" She stared at the ceiling. A tear came out of the corner of her eye and ran sideways down into her hair, and she made no move at all to wipe it. "I filled that out 4 months ago," she said, very softly. "There was a scare. Chest pains. 3 in the morning. You came in alone." "I drove myself." Emmett closed his eyes. "They gave me a clipboard," she said, "and they asked me who to call if something happened." She laughed. There was nothing in it. It was just a sound a person makes when something inside them gives way. And I sat in that waiting room. 38 years old. 900 employees. And I could not think of one name to write down. His jaw tightened. "My mother and I haven't spoken in 12 years. Adair, no siblings. My father." She stopped, started again. "The man I was going to marry left me at the worst moment of my life, and everybody else I know is on my payroll." She turned her head on the pillow and looked at him. And the ice was gone. All of it. Every bit. And underneath it, there was just a frightened, exhausted, lonely woman who had spent a decade and a half constructing something so nobody would ever see this exact expression on her face. "And then I thought of you." Emmett couldn't speak. "And I wrote your name before I decided to. My hand just did it." Her voice broke. "And then the nurse asked how I knew you. And I sat there with the pen. And I couldn't make my hand write employee. Because that's not. You were never. She couldn't finish it. Emmett reached out. He took her hand, the one without the IV, and folded it inside both of his, and his hands were rough and cracked and stained with 3 decades of other people's broken things, and hers disappeared inside them completely. And he held on. "Say it," a whisper. "Whatever it is, just say it. I've been waiting a year and a half, and I was too much of a coward to ever ask." She looked at their hands, then at his face. "You're the only person who ever wanted nothing from me." She said it like a confession. "Do you understand what that does to somebody like me? Everybody wants something. Money, access, a promotion, their name on my project. Everybody." Her voice cracked wide open. "And you just wanted to know if I'd eaten. A dare. You fixed my chair. You put a heater under my desk and signed the note fire hazard, like I was some kid you were looking after." She was crying now, and not hiding it, and not apologizing for it. And I would sit at that desk some nights and cry, because I couldn't remember the last time anybody was that kind to me, and didn't send an invoice for it. Emmett's whole face came apart. He pressed her hand to his forehead and shut his eyes. "I thought you didn't see me." Into her knuckles. "That's the God's honest truth. I thought I was invisible to you. I told myself that 100 times so I wouldn't do something stupid. So I wouldn't hope." "Emmett." He lifted his head. "You were the only thing I saw." And for one long, suspended moment in that room with the monitor beeping and the fluorescent humming and the afternoon going gray outside the window, 2 people who had spent 18 months lying to themselves stopped lying. That was it. That was the whole thing right there, and it took about 4 seconds. And then the door opened. "Ms. Kerrigan, I've got your labs back and I need to—" The doctor stopped in the doorway. I took in the scene. The held hands. The 2 wet faces. A man in a maintenance uniform sitting 3 inches from a CEO's hospital bed. He cleared his throat. "I can come back." "No." Adair pulled her hand out of Emmett's, and the armor tried to click into place. He watched her reach for it. He watched her actually reach, and it didn't fit right anymore. And all 3 of them knew it. "No. Tell me. What is it?" The doctor's face did a thing that made Emmett's stomach drop through the floor. "I'd rather discuss it privately." He stays. Instantly. No pause at all. "Whatever it is, he stays." The doctor looked at Emmett, then back at her. Then he nodded, slowly came in, shut the door, and pulled up her chart. And Emmett watched a man choose his words the way you choose your footing on ice. "What happened today wasn't exhaustion, Ms. Kerrigan." The room got very still. "Your blood work and your echocardiogram both showed us something. There's significant strain on your heart. There's a stress cardiomyopathy, and underneath that, there's an arrhythmia we didn't know about." He paused. "The combination is what put you on that floor." Nobody said anything. Then Emmett, before she could, "What does that mean?" The doctor looked at him. "In plain English, what does that mean for her?" "It means," the doctor said, "that if Ms. Kerrigan continues at the pace she's been keeping, the next episode may not end in a hospital bed." Emmett heard the monitor. Steady, beeping, hers. "This was a warning," the doctor said. "A loud one. You need real rest weeks, not days. You need your stress reduced dramatically. And you need follow-up care that you do not skip." He closed the chart. "I've watched people your age walk out of here promising to slow down. I've watched a lot of them come back in worse. I'm telling you with respect, Ms. Kerrigan. That road ends badly." Adair stared straight ahead. Her jaw set. And Emmett could see it. He could actually watch it happening behind her eyes, the calculating. The lining up of reasons. The acquisition. The board. The quarterly numbers. "The board meeting," she said. "I was in the middle of a dare. There's a deal on the table, Emmett. I can't just disappear for weeks. Do you have any idea what happens to a company when the CEO, a dare?" She stopped. The doctor took a small step back, and Emmett leaned forward. And he was not angry. That was the thing that made it land, that there was no anger in it at all. Just something underneath anger, something shaking. "I carried you out of that room today." She looked at him. "You want to know what that was like? You were dead weight in my arms. Your head was rolling. Your eyes were gone. Emmett. And I ran you down 11 floors thinking I was about to be the man who watched 2 women he loved die in front of him." His voice went on the word loved, and he didn't take it back. "I already did that once. I buried Rosalind, I held her hand while the machine went flat, and I promised myself I would never be that helpless again, as long as I lived." Tears were running down her face freely now, and she wasn't touching them. "So you can fight me on a lot of things." He reached out and took her hand again. "You can fight me on the heater. You can fight me on the sandwiches. You can fight me on being on your form. But you are not going to fight me on this. Emmett, you're going to rest. You're going to let that heart heal. And if that company can't survive 3 weeks without you standing in a boardroom about to die, then it was never as strong as you built it. And that is not on you." The doctor excused himself. Neither of them noticed him leave. Adair wiped her face with the back of her hand, and when she finally spoke, her voice was very small. "I don't know how to stop." "I know. No, that's the actual truth. I've been running since I was 23. If I stop moving..." She stopped. "If I stop moving, I don't know what's there. In the quiet." She looked at the ceiling. "I'm afraid of what's there." And Emmett Rooker reached out and very gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. That's all he did. A gesture so ordinary and so completely unlike anything the CEO of Kerrigan Vantage had been shown by another human being in 12 years that she closed her eyes against it, like it hurt. "Then you're not going to stop alone." She kept her eyes shut. "That's the whole thing you keep getting wrong. You keep thinking you've got to do the hard parts by yourself." His thumb moved once against her hand. "You don't. Not anymore. I'm right here. I've been right here the whole time." She opened her eyes. And that was the moment. That was the moment the walls came down, all of them, all at once. 12 years of engineering giving way in a room that smelled like hand sanitizer on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Except they didn't get to keep it, because that was also the exact moment the door opened again. No knock this time, and a man in a suit that cost more than Emmett Rooker's truck walked in like he owned the hospital, the building, and every person standing in it. Emmett didn't know him, but he watched Adair's entire face change when she saw him. The relief drained out of it. The color went with it. And the armor, the old armor, the real armor, the kind he had never once seen her wear in 18 months, slammed down harder than anything he'd witnessed in his life. And her hand pulled out of his so fast, it was like she'd touched a stove. He came in without knocking. That was the first thing Emmett noticed, and he'd remember it later as the thing that told him everything. A man who doesn't knock on a hospital room door is a man who has decided the door belongs to him. "Adair." He spread his arms. My God, I came the second I heard. I was 50 and expensive. Silver at the temples, in the way that costs money to look accidental. A watch that caught the fluorescent light, and a face arranged into concern, the way a florist arranges a display, technically correct, visibly assembled. Are you all right? Preston. Her voice came out flat as a frozen pond. What are you doing here? What am I? He came further into the room. You collapsed in front of the entire board. And only then did his eyes move to Emmett. They took in the flannel, the name patch, the work boots with the steel toes scuffed white. And then they moved away. That was it. That was the whole appraisal. It took less than a second, and Emmett had been on the receiving end of it, maybe 4,000 times in his life, and he knew exactly what it was. And who's this, your driver? Emmett didn't move. He didn't say anything either, because he had been dismissed by better-dressed men than this one since he was 19 years old, and he had learned a long time ago that the ones who need you to react are the ones you starve. Except he was watching Adair's hands. And Adair's hands had started to shake on top of the blanket. Not tremble, shake. The way a person's hands shake when the body knows something the face is still trying to deny. And Emmett had spent 18 months learning to read this woman in a language she never spoke out loud, and every single word of it was screaming at him now. This man is the danger. Preston sits on my board, Adair said, carefully, like each word had a price on it. I'm also the man who's about to save this company from whatever this morning turned into. He cut across her, without even looking at her. And the smooth went out of his voice, and underneath it there was something with an edge. Because while you were being carried out of a meeting by the Help 12 board members, watched their chief executive drop like a stone in the middle of the biggest deal in a decade. Preston. Do you have any idea how that looked, Adair? Do you have the faintest idea what they're saying right now? Get out. Emmett said it quietly. Preston turned, like he was noticing him all over again from the beginning as a novelty. I'm sorry. You heard me. Emmett stood up. And here's the thing about Emmett Rooker. I was not a big man in the way of gyms and supplements and photographs. He was 5'11", and he was 46, and he had a bad left knee from a fall off a scaffold years ago. But he had carried compressors up 11 flights of stairs when the freight elevator was down. He had spent 28 years wrestling a machinery that did not want to be wrestled. And when he stood up straight, he filled more of that room than the suit did. She's got a heart condition. Doctor told her 40 minutes ago she can't take stress. He looked at the shaking hands on the blanket, then back up. You walked in here, and it took you about 4 seconds to start her hands going. He didn't raise his voice. Not once. So I'll say it one more time. Nice and polite. Get out. For a moment, the two men just looked at each other, and the whole temperature of that room hung on a wire. Then Preston Vale laughed. Short, delighted, cruel. You have no idea who I am, do you? Nope. No, you really don't. And I don't much care. Emmett. Adair's voice. And it was strained in a way he had never heard it, not once, not in 18 months. It's leave it, please. Just leave it. He turned, and there was something in her face that stopped him cold. Something pleading, something frightened. Because Adair Kerrigan did not plead. Because Adair Kerrigan did not plead. She commanded. She negotiated. She once told a room full of men in Zurich exactly what she thought of their offer, and walked out of the building and had them on the phone before her car reached the airport. She did not beg, and she was begging him now, to let it go, to not push, to not find out. Preston caught it too, and a slow, ugly understanding spread across his face like a stain. He looked at Adair. He looked at Emmett. He looked at the chair pulled up 3 inches from the bed. at the clipboard on the nightstand, at two faces that had very obviously been crying in the same room for the same reason. And Emmett watched the man do the arithmetic. Oh, soft. Oh, Adair. Tell me you haven't. Preston, tell me you have not gotten yourself tangled up with the maintenance man. He shook his head, and there was something almost joyful in it, and that was the worst part. After everything, after what happened last time, and you let yourself get sentimental. He clucked his tongue. You never did learn, did you? That's enough. But her voice had lost every ounce of its power. Does he know? And now Preston was looking directly at Emmett, and smiling. Does he know about you, Adair? Where you came from? What you actually did to build all this? He gestured vaguely at the window at the city, at everything. Does he know why your own mother won't take your calls? Emmett's stomach turned to stone. He looked at her, and Adair wasn't looking at either of them. She was staring at her own hands on the blanket, and she had gone somewhere else, somewhere old, somewhere far away, somewhere that had teeth. And in a voice Emmett almost didn't recognize, she said, "Get out, Preston." Adair, I'm asking as a courtesy. The next time I ask, it'll be through counsel. Preston held up both hands, the picture of a reasonable man. I'm going. I'm going. He straightened his cuffs. But you and I need to talk before the board reconvenes Thursday, because I can protect you the way I always have. He paused at the door. Or I can let them do the thing they've wanted to do for 2 years. You know which one keeps all this yours. And then he looked at Emmett one last time, long, measuring. Enjoy your moment, pal. The door clicked shut, and the room was silent, except for a heart monitor that was beeping much, much too fast. Emmett didn't sit down. He stood there staring at the closed door with his hands slowly unclenching from fists he did not remember making, and then he turned around. She wouldn't look at him. Who was that? Not a question, but gentle. You should go home, she said to the blanket. Wren, she was sick. You said she had a fever. Fever broke Monday. Mrs. Pruitt has her. You should be with her. Not here. Not in the middle of Adair. He came back to the bed. He didn't take her hand this time. He just stood where she'd have to see him. 40 minutes ago, you told me I was the only person who ever wanted nothing from you. Her eyes closed. You told me I was the reason you didn't feel alone. You wrote it in ink, on a form, when you thought you might die. Emmett, please. So don't shut the door on me now. His voice dropped. That's the one thing I can't take. Everybody in your life shut a door on you. Don't you do it to me, too. Her eyes filled, and she said it. He's my ex-fiancé. Emmett went very still. The one who left. That's the clean version. Her voice was hollow. That's the version I tell people at dinners. He didn't just leave Emmett. He didn't just walk out during my worst moment. She looked up, and there was so much shame in her face that it physically hurt him to see it. The truth is much worse. The truth is the reason I built walls that not even you could get all the way through. Adair. And he is the only person alive who knows all of it. Which is why he's on my board. Which is why he owns a piece of my company. Which is why, when he says he can protect me or ruin me... She stopped. He is not bluffing. What did he do to you? Very low. It's not what he did to me. Her hands had started shaking so hard the IV line trembled against the rail. It's what he made me do, and then he kept the proof, and he has held it over my head for 12 years. She looked at him, And it is the reason I have never not once let a single human being close enough to find out." He pulled the chair over. He sat down. "Tell me." "Emmett. Adair." He put both hands on the rail. "I have got nowhere to be. There is a man in an $8,000 suit who just walked in here and made your hands shake, and he is coming back Thursday, and I am not walking out that door until I know what he's got." She looked at the ceiling for a long time. Then she said, "My name isn't Kerrigan." 12 years ago, she was 26 years old, and she was not Adair Kerrigan, chief executive, because Adair Kerrigan did not exist yet. She was Ada Purcell from Youngstown, Ohio, and she had a name that sounded like exactly what it was. Like a girl whose father drank, and whose mother cleaned office buildings on the night shift, and came home at 6 in the morning, smelling like floor stripper and lemon. Odessa Purcell worked 2 jobs for 18 years. 2. And her daughter clawed through college on loans and stubbornness, and a work-study job in a mailroom, and she came out the other side into an entry-level position at a mid-size investment firm downtown, and there she met a rising star named Preston Vale. He was 38, and she was 26. "I thought he hung the moon," Adair said. Emmett didn't say anything. "What I actually loved," she said, "was the way he made me feel like I mattered. That's the part nobody tells you. It wasn't him. It was that he looked at me. And nobody had looked at me since I was 9 years old." "So you loved him?" "It cost him something to say it, and she heard that it did." "I thought I did." She laughed. "Nothing in it. And I'd have followed him anywhere. And I did. Right off a cliff." The firm was doing something illegal. She didn't know at first. That's the part she needed him to understand. And Emmett watched her. Watched a 38-year-old woman in a hospital gown work to convince a maintenance man that she hadn't known. Money moving that wasn't supposed to move. Numbers massaged for 4 clients who mattered more than the other 200. Preston was in the middle of it, and he was good at it, and he was being paid extraordinarily well. And then, one night, he came to her apartment with a folder. "He told me the SEC was starting to ask questions." Her voice was steady. Her hands were not. "He told me somebody had to sign off on a set of documents. Document that would make the whole structure look legitimate. And he said it needed to be someone the investigators wouldn't look at twice." She swallowed. "Someone clean. Someone junior." She turned her head. "Someone in love enough to do what she was told." "You signed them." Quietly. "I signed them." A tear ran down and she let it. "God help me, Emmett. I signed them. He told me it was routine. He told me he'd handle everything. He told me we were building a life, and this was just the price of the door we were walking through." "You were 26. "I signed my name on documents I now know were felony fraud. 22 pages. My signature on every one." The monitor kept its rhythm, and then the investigation got serious, and the firm needed somebody to take the fall if it came to that. She stopped. Her voice finally broke. "And I found out the whole thing had been built so that if anybody went down, it would be me. My signature. My name. Not his. Never his." Emmett's hands had curled into fists on his knees. He'd engineered it from the beginning. The entire structure. Every conversation. Every dinner. He picked me the way you pick a tool out of a drawer because I was 26, and I had no family with money, and no lawyer, and nobody in this world who'd have known how to help me. He chose me because nobody would come. What happened? There was gravel in it. Nothing. She almost laughed. The investigation collapsed. Pure luck. A bigger fish surfaced at another firm, and the SEC went after that instead, and our firm quietly dissolved, and everyone scattered. I was never charged, never even interviewed. And Preston kept the documents. She wiped her face. All 22 pages, and he came to my apartment the week it blew over, and I actually thought he was coming to apologize. She looked at the ceiling. He smiled at me. And he said, "Now we understand each other, Ada. Now you know exactly what I'm capable, and you'll remember it." And then he left. And then he left. She nodded, said we were incompatible. Left me 26 years old with a secret that could put me in federal prison, and the knowledge that the man I'd loved had chosen me specifically because I was naive enough to be thrown away. She looked at her hands. That's the moment, Emmett. That's the exact hour I decided I would never need anybody again as long as I lived. That I'd build something so big and so strong that no man could ever hand me a pen and a lie and make me sign my life away. Silence. I built Kerrigan Vantage out of that. Out of terror. Not ambition. People think it's ambition. A dare. It's just fear with a good haircut. He waited. Then because something in the shape of it wasn't right. Because he had spent 28 years listening to machines and knowing when a sound was wrong. Your mother. She went rigid. That's not part of... Preston brought her up. Emmett. He walked in that door, and out of everything he could have used, he used your mother. He leaned in. Why? And Adair Kerrigan, who had just told a man about federal fraud without flinching, put her hand over her eyes. Because that one was worse. He waited. 6 months before I signed anything, she said, he sat me down in a restaurant. And he told me that if I was serious about the life we were building, there were people I'd have to be careful about. Her voice went strange. He said it exactly like that. Careful about. Meaning my mother cleaned buildings for a living. Emmett didn't move. He said she'd embarrass me. He said clients talk. He said there'd come a night when somebody at a dinner would ask what my parents did, and I'd have to answer, and everything I'd built would slide 6 inches to the left in their minds, and never slide back. She was crying now, and it was different than before, and Emmett understood that they had finally arrived at the actual wound. And I was 26. A dare. And I believed him. She pressed the heel of her hand against her eye. I stopped calling. Slowly at first, so it wouldn't look like anything. Every other week. Then once a month. And she kept calling me, and I kept letting it ring. And then one day she stopped. The monitor beeped. That was 12 years ago, and I have not spoken to my mother since. Because he told you to. Because I let him. No. Emmett's voice came out hard. Ada, look at me. And her head came up, because he'd used the other name, the real one, and nobody had said it out loud in 12 years. He didn't take a company from you. He took your mother. He sat across a table and told a 26-year-old that the woman who worked 2 jobs for 18 years was a liability. Emmett, that's not a business decision. That's not fraud. That's a man reaching into your chest and taking out the one thing that would have saved you. So there'd be nobody left to call when he pulled the trigger. She was shaking. He isolated you first. That's what he did first. Because you can't blackmail a woman who's got somebody to run to. She made a sound then that Emmett would hear for the rest of his life. 4 years ago he came back, she said. Bad investments, a divorce, debts. He showed up with a briefcase full of my signatures and made me an offer. A board seat, a percentage, in exchange for his silence. And you paid. I've been paying for 4 years. Her jaw set. He sits on my board. He collects dividends. And every few months, when he wants to remind me of my place, he does what he just did in that doorway. Emmett stood up. He walked to the window and stood with his back to her, and his shoulders were rigid, and Adair watched him, and felt her whole heart start to crack open. Because this was it. This was the part she had been dreading since the moment he read 6 words off a clipboard. Say something. Nothing. Please. Even if it's that you're leaving, just say it fast. He turned around, and his face wasn't disgust. It wasn't judgment. It wasn't the careful, polite recalibration she had watched 100 men make when they learned where she came from. It was fury, and she understood with something like vertigo that none of it was aimed at her. You were 26, he said. You were a kid in love with a 38-year-old man who spent 6 months grooming you into a position where he could throw you away. He crossed the room. And you have spent 12 years punishing yourself for a crime that he committed and pinned on you. He took her face in both hands. Adair, look at me. You did not do a bad thing. Emmett, a bad man did a bad thing to you, and then he made it look like your fault. That is not the same. That is not remotely the same. Do you hear me? And she came apart. Really came apart, the kind of crying that happens when a wound you have kept sealed for a decade is finally touched by somebody gentle. And he sat on the edge of that bed and held her while she did it, and neither of them said anything for a long time. I'm a fraud, she said into his shoulder. You built a company with your own 2 hands out of the worst thing that ever happened to you. Emmett, that's not fraud. That's the opposite of fraud. That's the strongest thing I ever heard in my life. He'll ruin me. Thursday. No, Emmett said. How can you possibly? Because I've spent 28 years fixing things nobody else could figure out how to fix. And there was a hard, quiet certainty in his voice that she had never heard in it before. And a man who's been getting away with something for 4 years gets comfortable. Comfortable men get sloppy. He wiped her face with his thumbs. And you are not alone in this anymore. 3 days later, Adair went home from the hospital. And 40 minutes after that, Emmett Rooker was called into an office on the 2nd floor and terminated. They use the word terminated, not laid off, not reassigned. Terminated, and the woman from HR read it off a laptop screen and couldn't hold his eyes while she did it. Unauthorized entry into a restricted executive area. Property damage to a boardroom door. Failure to follow emergency protocol. Emergency protocol, Emmett said. Mr. Rooker. She stopped breathing on a marble floor. I understand. The protocol is you call the front desk, and the front desk calls the ambulance, and the ambulance gets there in 9 minutes. He set his keys on the table. She didn't have 9 minutes. The woman looked at the laptop. This came down from a board member. She said it very quietly. She did not have to say it. And Emmett Rooker walked out of that building carrying a cardboard box with 3 flannel shirts in it, a coffee mug his daughter had painted at a birthday party, and a photograph of a woman who had been dead for 4 years. He'd tell Adair tomorrow. He'd figure something out. I was 46, and he'd been employed continuously since he was 17, and a man can find work, and there was 6 weeks of cushion in the account, maybe 7, if he was careful about groceries. He got home at 4. He made spaghetti at 5:30 because Wren had a spelling test the next day, and spaghetti was a spelling test food. And at 6:15, somebody knocked on the door. It was a woman, 30s, cardigan. a canvas bag over one shoulder and a laminated badge on a lanyard, and she had the specific, exhausted kindness of a person who does a job that nobody thanks them for. "Mr. Rooker?" "Yes." "My name is Paulette Vandermeer. I'm with the County Department of Children and Family Services." Emmett's hearing went strange. "I'm here because we received a report." What? No, back up, say that again, because you did not just. She's 9. She's 9 years old, and she is standing directly behind me right now, with a fork in her hand. "A report," he said. "An anonymous report, concerning a minor child left without adult supervision on multiple overnight occasions." She glanced at her clipboard, and the clipboard. Got another clipboard. "Including the nights of the 14th, 15th, and 16th. The 3 nights he slept at the hospital. I need to speak with you, and I'll need to see the child." And Emmett turned around, and Renker was standing at the bottom of the stairs in her socks, holding her fork, with red sauce on the corner of her mouth. 9 years old, and she had heard every word. "Dad." Her voice came out very small. "Are they going to take me away?" And Emmett Rooker, who had carried a woman down 11 floors, who had buried a wife who had not raised his voice in his own home in 4 years, got down on one knee in his hallway. "No, because Marcus at school, his cousin, Ren." He put both hands on her shoulders. "Look at me." "No." She looked at him. 9 years old, sauce on her mouth, and she was doing the thing kids do when they are trying to decide whether an adult is telling them the truth or telling them the version, and Emmett understood that whatever he said in the next 4 seconds, she would carry for 30 years. "This lady's got a job to do," he said. "Somebody told her a lie about me, so now she has to come find out if it's a lie. That's all this is." "Is it a lie?" "Yes." "Okay." And she went and sat on the 3rd stair from the bottom, with her fork still in her hand, because that's where she always sat when adults were talking. Paulette Vandermeer had done this 2,000 times. She'd walked into apartments with no food in them. She'd walked into houses where a child ran and hid in a cabinet. She had a way of holding a clipboard against her chest that said, "I am not the enemy," and she'd developed it out of necessity, and it worked about half the time. She looked at the hallway. Coat hooks at 2 heights, 1 adult, 1 at 40 inches. A school calendar on the refrigerator with a birthday circled in marker. A green tin recipe box on top of the fridge. And a pot of spaghetti still steaming on the stove at 6:15 on a Tuesday. "Mr. Rooker, I want to be clear with you. An anonymous report is not a finding." "Okay." "But I do have to complete an assessment." "Okay." "Can you tell me about the nights of the 14th through the 16th? And here's where it could have gone bad. Because Emmett opened his mouth to say I was at a hospital with a woman, and stopped. Say it. Say it plainly. Except what does that sound like? Out loud. Say it out loud in your head. First, I left my 9-year-old 3 nights in a row to sit with my boss. My boss. Who I'm not, who I haven't, who is a billionaire, who I have no legal standing with, who I am not related to in any single way that this woman writing on that clipboard could enter into a box. It sounds bad, Rooker. It sounds bad, and it's true. And those are not the same thing, and you have got about 1 second to figure out which one matters. "Ma'am," he said, "before I answer that, I'd like you to talk to somebody." He walked past her. He opened the front door, and he knocked on the door across the hall. Verna Pruitt opened it in a housecoat the color of a traffic cone. She looked at Emmett. She looked past Emmett, at the woman with the lanyard. And 68 years of information passed across that landing in about a second and a half. "Oh," Verna said. "Oh, is that what this is?" She turned around and shouted into her own apartment, "Dorothea, get the phone tree." What happened over the next 40 minutes was not a legal maneuver. Nobody planned it. There was no strategy. There was a 68-year-old widow in a housecoat who made 4 phone calls, and 40 minutes later, there were 4 women in Emmett Rooker's living room, and one of them had brought a coffee cake. Verna Pruitt, 68, widowed 9 years. Dorothea Kwan, 72, from 3C, who had taught 4th grade for 31 years and still corrected people's grammar out of reflex. Margaret Boscovich, 65, from the ground floor, who had raised 5 children and buried one. And Hazel Rooney, 79, who lived at the end of the hall and who had at some point in the last 4 years appointed herself the building's official recorder of everything. They did not sit down. That's the part Paulette Vandermeer would tell her supervisor about later. 4 women in their 60s and 70s standing in a living room, arranged in a loose half-circle around a caseworker, like a jury that had already deliberated. "You want to know about the 14th, Hazel Rooney said. "Ma'am, I've got it written down." And she opened a spiral notebook. A spiral notebook. 14th. He knocked on Verna's door at 8:40 in the evening. I heard it. I hear everything. My bedroom shares that wall. She turned a page. The child slept at Verna's. Came back at 6:50 in the morning for her school clothes. 15th same. 16th same, except Marguerite took her because Verna had her hip appointment. Paulette looked up. "You wrote this down?" "I write everything down. I'm 79 and I don't sleep." "Ma'am, why would you?" "Because I like knowing who's in my building." Hazel closed the notebook. "And because that man has fixed my radiator 4 winters running and never once let me pay him, and I keep a record of debts." "He shovels the walk," Marguerite said. "Ours and the church's," Dorothea said. "He drives Hazel to dialysis Thursdays." "That's not relevant," Hazel said. "It is extremely relevant," Dorothea said, "and don't interrupt." Paulette Vandermeer looked down at her clipboard. She'd been doing this 9 years. She had never once, not one time, walked into a household on an anonymous report and been met by a documented alibi in a spiral notebook. "Mrs. Pruitt," she said, "can you tell me why he was gone those nights?" And Verna Pruitt folded her arms. "There's a woman he works with. Her heart gave out in front of 50 people, and not one of them stood up. He carried her out of the building himself. Ma'am, she had nobody, not a soul, and he sat in a hospital hallway 3 nights so she wouldn't wake up in an empty room." She looked directly at the caseworker. "You've got a form there that says he left his daughter, and I understand you have to write on it. But I have watched that man for 4 years, and I am telling you what he actually did, which is that he taught a little girl what you do when somebody's got nobody." Silence. "And she was across the hall the entire time, with a woman who loves her. From the stairs, small, I had pancakes." Everybody turned. "Ren Rooker, 3rd step fork. Mrs. Pruitt makes them with the chocolate chips in a face." She thought about it. "Dad makes them regular." Paulette Vandermeer wrote for a long moment. Then she clicked her pen shut. "Mr. Rooker, I'm going to be honest with you because you were honest with me." "Okay. Anonymous reports like this one come in 2 kinds. There's the neighbor who's actually worried, and then there's the other kind." She put the clipboard in her bag. "The other kind always has dates in it. Specific dates. Because somebody had to know the dates." Emmett didn't say anything. "I'll complete the assessment. It takes a few days, but I'll tell you what I saw here." She looked around the room. "I saw a hot dinner, a school calendar, and 4 women who came when a man knocked on one door." She shouldered her bag. "That's not a neglect case. That's a village." The file was closed 9 days later. But that first night the caseworker came. Emmett Rooker did not sleep. He put Wren to bed at 9. He sat at the kitchen table until 11, and then he got up and knocked on Verna's door and asked her to listen for the child. And he got in the truck, and he drove an hour southeast to Youngstown. He had the address from a personnel form. Adair had once filled out and forgotten about back before she was Adair, back when a woman named Purcell was still listed as next of kin on something. The house was small and white and had a porch light burning at midnight. He parked across the street, and he sat there for an hour. "Because it isn't yours, Rooker. This is not yours to do. You do not walk up to a 64-woman's door at midnight and hand her 12 years. Except a man in a good suit put a 9-year-old's name in a county file today. And he did it because he found the one Kafur thing I can't lose. And somewhere in this house there's a woman who lost hers the same way. To the same man. And nobody ever told her that." He didn't knock. He wrote on a page, torn out of the notebook he kept in the glove box in blocky capitals. The same handwriting that had once said, "Fire hazard, your daughter is sick. She's in Cleveland. She doesn't know I came. ER." He pushed under the door, and he drove home. 9 days later, with the county file closed, Emmett drove to Adair's building after Wren was asleep. He didn't go up right away. He sat in his truck in the parking garage for 11 minutes with his hands on the wheel. Tell her. Except if you tell her, she'll do something. That's what she does. She fixes it with money, or with lawyers, or with a phone call, and that man will find out she pushed back and he'll go looking for the next place to push. And the next place is a 9-year-old. You cannot put a 9-year-old on the table. You can't. He rode up. She opened the door, and she was in a sweater with her hair down, and she looked better. A week of actual sleep had done something, and Emmett stood in the doorway and could not make his mouth work. "You're not coming in," she said. "Adair." "You've been standing there 8 seconds. Emmett." "What?" So he told her. The termination. The caseworker. The dates in the report. And he watched something happen in Adair Kerrigan's face that he had never seen before, and would only ever see once more in his life. She went completely still. Not frozen. Not shocked. Still. The way water goes still right before it turns. "He put my daughter's name in a government file," Emmett said. "Not mine. Hers." Emmett. "So here's what I came to say, and I need you to let me finish." He looked at the floor. "I'm out." Her mouth opened. "I'm not doing Thursday. I'm not standing in that room. I'm not Adair. I made a promise at a graveside 4 years ago, and it was 1 sentence long, and the sentence was, 'She comes first.' I know. And if I keep pushing this man, he's going to keep swinging at her. Because that's the whole reason he swung at her the first time. He found the thing I can't afford to lose, and he touched it just to show me he could." His voice went. "And I can't. I can't take that chance, not with her. I'd take it with anything else. I'd take it with my hands." He looked up, and she was crying. Not the way she had in the hospital. Silently. Standing perfectly straight in her own doorway. "Say something." "You're right," Adair said. "Don't. No. You're right, Emmett, and I need you to hear that I'm not saying it to be gracious." She wiped her face with the flat of her hand once. "I'm saying it Because 12 years ago, a man made me choose between a person I loved and something I wanted. She looked at him. And I chose wrong. A dare. And I have paid for it every single day since. She stepped back. So you go home to your daughter, and you don't come Thursday, and you don't ever apologize to me for this. I'm sorry. Emmett, I'm sorry. Go home. He went home, and Adair Kerrigan shut the door and stood in the middle of a beautiful empty apartment for a very long time. And then she went to her desk, and she opened her laptop. Here's what she did, and this is the part Emmett Rooker never knew until much later, and when he found out, it undid him more than anything else in this entire story. She did not call her corporate firm. She could have. She had 8 attorneys, on retainer 3 of them famous, and any one of them would have taken the call at 11 at night and billed her $900 for it. Except every one of them did business with people Preston knew. He'd have it within a day. So instead, Adair Kerrigan opened her own company's personnel system, and she pulled the file of an employee who had been terminated 10 days earlier. Rooker hire date. Emergency contact, Pruitt, V., across the hall. And then a section from the onboarding paperwork 3 years old. A section. Almost nobody fills out a box about prior legal matters and wage garnishments. There was a note in it. Medical debt collection action. Resolved. Represented pro bono by Adeyemi Legal Aid Clinic Atilai Adeyemi 4 years ago, while a woman named Rosalind Rooker was dying. Upstairs, a hospital billing department had gone after her husband for $160,000 they were not owed, and somebody had stopped them. For free. Adair sat back in her chair. He never told me that. In 18 months of sandwiches and light bulbs, that man never once mentioned that somebody saved him. He mentioned the heater. He mentioned the diner. He mentioned a crayon drawing his daughter made. He never mentioned the worst 9 days of his life. She wrote down the name. Loretta Adeyemi was 63 years old and had a corner office in a building with a laundromat on the ground floor. The office had 1 window, 4 filing cabinets, and a coffee maker older than most of her clients. She listened for 11 minutes without saying a word. Adair had rehearsed it in the car. Chronological, unemotional, the way she'd deliver a quarterly. And she got about 4 minutes in before her voice went, and she kept going anyway, because Loretta Adeyemi had the specific gift of sitting completely still while a person falls apart. When it was done, Loretta took her glasses off. Let me make sure I have it. Okay. At 26, a man, 12 years your senior, isolated you from your mother, then handed you documents to sign, then structured the whole thing, so you'd be the one indicted. Yes. He then reappeared 4 years ago and traded silence for a board seat and equity. Yes. And this month, when a maintenance man got between the 2 of you, he had that man fired and put a 9-year-old child into a county file. Yes. Loretta Adeyemi put her glasses back on. Ms. Kerrigan, I have been waiting my entire career for a file like this to walk through that door. There's something else. The man he had fired. Adair's voice was not steady. You represented him. 4 years ago. Rooker. A hospital came after him while his wife was dying. Loretta stopped, and something moved across her face. Rosalind, she said. Yes. I remember Rosalind Rooker. She turned to the window. I remember because that man came in here with a shoebox. A shoebox, Ms. Kerrigan. Every bill, every statement in order, rubber-banded by month. and he apologized to me for taking up my time. She turned back around. His wife had 9 days left, and he apologized to me. She pulled a legal pad toward her. Well, isn't that something? They worked for 2 days. Loretta Adeyemi went through 12 years of history, the way a surgeon goes through tissue slowly with a light naming things as she found them. And on the second afternoon, she stopped writing. She looked up. Ms. Kerrigan, when did you sign those documents? 12 years ago, March. You're certain? I have thought about that month every day since. Yes. Loretta set her pen down. Then I need to tell you something, and I want you sitting down when I do. I am sitting down. Then I want you holding on to something. She turned her laptop around. Securities fraud carries a federal statute of limitations, depending on the theory 5 years, 6 on the outside for certain claims. Adair looked at the screen. 12 years ago, Ms. Kerrigan. The statute ran out on the criminal exposure. It ran out a long time ago. Loretta folded her hand. Those documents cannot be used to charge you with anything. Not by the SEC. Not by the Department of Justice. Not by anyone. The room was very quiet. Their paper. Adair Kerrigan did not move. Say that again. Their paper. They have been paper for years. No. No, that's no. That isn't. Because he said. He sat in my office 4 years ago, and he opened the briefcase, and he laid them out on my desk one by one, and he said federal prison, and he said 20 years, and he said everything you built, and he said, and I never asked anyone. I never asked one single person. 12 years. 12 years of not sleeping. 12 years of not calling my mother, because I thought if she knew, she'd have to lie for me. 12 Christmases. 12 birthdays. My father's funeral I found out 3 weeks after they buried him from a news alert because I was too afraid to be in a room with people who knew me. For paper. She put both hands flat on the desk. How long? I'd have to check the exact filing dates, but it's been dead since you were roughly 32. 6 years. At least. 6 years. And Adair Kerrigan put her face in her hands and laughed. It was a terrible sound. Loretta Adeyemi had heard it before in this office from other people, and she did not interrupt it. He knew, Adair said. He knew. Of course he knew. Ms. Kerrigan, look at me. Loretta leaned forward. The best extortionists in the world are not the ones with the best evidence. They're the ones who make certain you never look at it closely. He didn't need a real gun. He needed you too frightened to check whether it was loaded. She sat back. And he had that for 12 years, because you never told a single soul, which was the entire design. Adair wiped her face. So it's over. No. Loretta. The old fraud is dead. But the blackmail, Loretta Adeyemi smiled, and it was not a warm smile at all. Every dividend that man has collected is money he obtained by extortion. And that isn't 12 years old. That's this quarter. That's last quarter. Extortion, obstruction. And this month, he added retaliation against a witness's employment and a false report to a state agency. She tapped the legal pad. The gun in his hand is empty. The one in yours is not. Then Corinne Ledger walked into the office. Adair's executive assistant. 6 years. 34 years old, precise, unflappable, the woman who knew Adair's calendar better than Adair did. She'd texted an hour earlier, I need to see you. Not at the office. She stood in the doorway of a legal aid clinic in a wool coat, with her handbag held in both hands like a shield. He moved the meeting. Adair stood up. What? The board. It's not Thursday anymore, it's tomorrow, 7 a.m. How do you? Because I told him you hired a lawyer. The room stopped. What? No, say that differently. Say that a different way, because you did not just Corinne. I told him last night. He called me at 9:40, and I told him. Corinne. And then the assistant's face came apart, and 34 years of composure went with it. He has photographs of me. Silence. From 9 years ago. Before you. Before this job. I was 25 and I was an intern at his firm, and She stopped. Started again. He has photographs, and he has had them for 9 years. And when I got this job, he found me, and he told me exactly what he'd do with them. And he has been calling me every few weeks for 3 years, asking what's on your calendar. Her hands were shaking so badly, the handbag knocked against her knee. Your travel, your medications, who you meet with. I told him about the cardiologist appointment in the spring. I told him about the hospital. Corinne. I told him where the child goes to school, Adair. I didn't know why he wanted it. I swear to God I didn't know why. She was sobbing now. And then that caseworker showed up at that man's apartment, and I knew. I've known for days, and I couldn't. And Adair Kerrigan crossed the room. Everybody in that office expected something. Loretta expected fury. Corinne expected termination, or worse, expected the thing she'd been rehearsing in her car, the sentence that starts with, "After everything I've done for you." Adair pulled out a chair. Sit down. Corinne stared at her. Sit down, Corinne. She sat. And Adair Kerrigan knelt in front of her assistant, in a $2,000 suit on a linoleum floor in a legal aid clinic, and took both her hands. Listen to me. Adair, How old were you? 25. And how old was he? Corinne's mouth trembled. 41. Say it again. 41. Corinne. Adair's grip tightened. He did it to me at 26. He did it to you at 25. And I have been sitting in a corner office thinking I was the only one, and you have been sitting 40 feet away thinking exactly the same thing. I helped him. I isolated you. That's what he does. That's the entire technique. He finds a young woman with nobody to tell, and he makes certain she never gets one. She looked up at her. He's been calling you for 3 years. I've been paying him for 4. And he sat us 40 feet apart the whole time so that neither one of us would ever say a word. Corinne broke. Completely. And a woman who had been silent for 9 years cried on the shoulder of a woman who had been silent for 12, in an office with a laundromat downstairs, while a 63-year-old attorney quietly got up and closed the blinds. When it was done, Corinne reached into her handbag. She took out her phone. I recorded him. Loretta Adeyemi's head came up. Every call. For 3 years. Corinne wiped her face. I don't know why I started. I think I wanted somebody to believe me someday, even if it was only me. She set it on the desk. There's 141 of them. Loretta picked it up like it was made of glass. Ohio's a one-party consent state, Ms. Ledger. I know, Corinne said. I looked it up when I was 25. Except recordings are a voice. That's what Loretta said at 11 o'clock that night, with 3 legal pads covered and a cold pizza box on the filing cabinet. A voice can be argued with. A voice on a phone can be, I was joking. It can be, that's out of context. It can be a man in a good suit with an expensive attorney saying that woman is unstable and has an axe to grind. She took her glasses off. I need something that isn't a voice. I need paper. I need him physically in that building on the nights those calls happened. And I need a document that says so generated by the building itself that nobody in this room touched. The after-hours log, Adair said. What is that? Every entry outside business hours. Badge swipe floor timestamp. It prints from a terminal in the basement records room. Can you pull it? No. Adair's voice went flat. Facilities credentials only. Executive badges don't open that door, I know, because I've been locked out of it twice. Silence. There is exactly one person, Adair said slowly, who has spent 3 years in the basement of my building. Ms. Kerrigan, and I told him not to come. And here's the thing. Here is the actual thing. And it happened at 11:52 that night, which anybody who has been paying attention will notice, is exactly the time on a clock in a corner office 18 months earlier. Emmett Rooker's phone rang. He didn't answer it. He looked at the screen with his thumb hovering, and he did not answer it, because he had made a promise at a graveside, and the promise was 1 sentence long. It stopped. He put the phone face down on the kitchen table. He sat there in the dark for 4 minutes. And then a small voice from the doorway said, Dad, Wren, nightgown, bare feet. Hey, why are you up? Was that her? He didn't answer. Dad. She came and stood by the chair. I did my report. What report? For school. Mrs. Ellery said do a report on a community helper. She put a folder on the table. Construction paper. 9 years old. Everybody did firefighters, Wren said. So I did the other kind. Emmett opened the folder. I interviewed 4 people. Mr. Osgood, who empties the trash at school. Miss Delphine in the cafeteria. Mr. Halloran, security. And Mrs. Kwan upstairs because she was a teacher. And now nobody asks her anything. He looked at the first page. In pencil, in 9-year-old handwriting, question 1. What is your whole name, Mr. Osgood, said Reginald. He said nobody at the school has ever asked him that. He works there 22 years. Emmett's hands weren't steady. He got quiet, Wren said. When I asked, is that bad? No, baby. I put it at the end, too. She pointed. My conclusion. He read it. Conclusion. My dad says read the name tag, and then say the name. I think people don't do it, because they think the person is part of the building. But nobody is part of a building. Everybody has a whole name, and most people only get asked 1 time. He put the folder down. Dad. Yeah. Is she gonna be okay? The lady. And Emmett Rooker sat in his kitchen at midnight and understood that he had gotten one thing exactly backwards. You keep saying she comes first. She does. She comes first. That's not the question. The question is what you're actually teaching her. Because she's 9 and she is watching, and one day she is going to be 26. And some man in a good suit is going to sit across a table from her and tell her that somebody she loves is a liability. And what she does in that moment is not going to come from a lecture. It's going to come from a memory of what her father did on a Wednesday night when it cost him something. Wren. Yeah. If I had to go somewhere tonight, late, and Mrs. Pruitt sat with you. She looked at him. Is somebody alone? He couldn't speak. Dad, is somebody alone? Yeah, baby. Then go, Wren Rooker said, like it was arithmetic, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Nobody's supposed to be alone when they're sick. He was at the building at 12:40 in the morning. They had not deactivated his badge, which sounds like luck, and wasn't it was a fired maintenance supervisor, knowing that terminations route to IT on Fridays, and there is a kind of expertise that nobody puts on a resume. Basement, records room, the terminal with the yellowed keyboard. The archive went back 6 years. He set it to print, 411 pages, and while the printer chewed through them at 19 pages a minute, Emmett Rooker stood in the basement of a building he'd been thrown out of and did the thing he'd been doing his entire life. He read a name tag. Bottom of every page, small gray type. The footer, the system printed automatically on every document it had ever generated. Generated by Rooker Emmett J. Facilities, his whole name, on 411 pages. I got to the legal aid clinic at 2:15 in the morning with a box under his arm. Adair stood up so fast the chair went over. Emmett, I got the log. You said, I know what I said. He set the box on the desk. 411 pages. Every after-hours swipe in that tower for 6 years. He looked at Loretta. Your man's badge is on 406 of those lines, and I'd bet the truck a good 90 of them land inside 9 minutes of a call on that girl's phone. Loretta Adeyemi looked at the box, then at him. Mr. Rooker. Ma'am. You brought me a shoebox once. I remember. You apologized to me for taking up my time. I remember that, too. Don't ever do it again, Loretta said, and picked up the top page. Nobody slept. At 4 in the morning, Loretta laid it out, and it was so simple that Adair kept waiting for the rest of it. You don't confess, Loretta said. You accuse. That's it. That's everything. Ms. Kerrigan, a woman who admits to signing fraudulent documents, is a defendant. A woman who walks into a room and states that she was groomed at 26, isolated from her family, and extorted for 4 years, that woman is a complaining witness. She put down her pen. You will be telling that room the worst thing in your life, and they will not hear a criminal. They will hear the first person brave enough to say it out loud. And Preston will do what he has always done. He will reach for the sword. Loretta almost smiled. Because it has worked every single time for 12 years, and men like that do not learn new moves. He'll threaten you with those papers in front of the entire board. And then he will have committed extortion in front of the whole table of federal prosecutor and 411 pages of his own badge swipes. Adair sat back. There's a prosecutor. There will be by 6. At 5:50 in the morning. Emmett made eggs. In her kitchen. In a kitchen that had, as far as he could tell, never produced a hot meal in its entire existence. There was a pan still in the box, and a spatula still on the cardboard, and 1 bowl. Adair came out in a charcoal suit that cost more than his truck, and she stopped in the doorway, and she put her hand over her mouth. What? Nothing. She couldn't do it. It's what? This is what it looks like. Her voice was thick. Isn't it? A person in your kitchen in the morning. Somebody making you eat before the worst day of your life. She looked at the pan. I'm 38 years old, and I never knew what that looked like. Emmett set the pan down. He crossed the kitchen and took her face in both hands. Get used to it. And then he kissed her. And Adair, Kerrigan, the Winter Queen, the woman who had commanded rooms full of men who wanted her to fail, took a fistful of a flannel shirt and held on to it like it was the only fixed thing in a spinning world. When they broke apart, she pressed her forehead to his. Eat, he said. You can't take down a monster on an empty stomach. At 6:05, the doorbell rang. They both froze. Nobody rang that doorbell. There was a concierge, a keycard, a list. Adair looked at the screen on the wall, and her hand went to her throat. Because standing in that lobby was a woman in a cloth coat with a canvas tote bag, 64 years old, with her hair gone gray at the front, and her hands red at the knuckles. the way hands get after 30 years of floor stripper and lemon. She'd taken the 4:15 bus from Youngstown. She'd been riding for 90 minutes, and she was holding a piece of paper, a note folded twice in blocky handwriting. Adair turned around very slowly. Emmett. I was looking at the floor. What did you do? Emmett didn't look up. The night the caseworker came, his voice came out low. I put Wren to bed, and I got in the truck and I drove to Youngstown. Emmett. I didn't knock. I want you to know that. I sat across the street for an hour, and I didn't knock because it wasn't mine to knock. I put a note under the door, and I drove home. Adair stood in the middle of her own kitchen, with her hand still at her throat, and the screen on the wall, showing a woman in a cloth coat, and her mouth kept starting words that didn't finish. No, because it's been 12 years, and you don't put a note under a door after 12 years. You don't get to. She came. She got on a bus at 4:15 in the morning. She's 64, and she got on a bus. Adair. I can't. You can. Emmett, I don't. Her voice went. I don't know what to say to her. 12 years. What is the sentence? Tell me the sentence. And Emmett Rooker said the only thing he had. You don't need a sentence. He reached past her and pressed the button. The elevator took 90 seconds. It was the longest 90 seconds of Adair Kerrigan's life, and she had had some long ones. She stood in the open doorway of her apartment, with her hands at her sides, because there was nothing to do with them. Emmett stood behind her and slightly to the left, where he'd stood for 18 months, where he'd always stood. The numbers climbed. 14, 15, 16. What if she's angry? She should be angry. She has every right on this earth to be angry, and I'd rather she was angry, because angry I know how to. What if she isn't? Oh God, what if she isn't? The doors opened. Odessa Purcell stood there with a canvas tote bag and a folded note. She was smaller than Adair remembered. That was the first thing. 12 years of memory had kept her at full size, and time had done what time does. Her hair had gone gray at the front and stayed dark at the back. She wore a cloth coat, brown, the same cut of coat she'd worn for 25 years, because a coat that works is a coat that works. Her knuckles were red and cracked. They had been red and cracked for 30 years. She looked at her daughter, and Adair Kerrigan, who had negotiated across a table from men who wanted to destroy her, who had told her board exactly nothing for 12 years, who had a face the business press called unreadable, put both hands over her mouth. Mom. Odessa didn't move. I'm sorry. Nothing. Mom, I'm so... And Odessa Purcell crossed that hallway in 3 steps and took hold of her daughter with both arms and held on the way. You hold something. You dropped a long way, and thought had broken. Adair made a sound that was not a word. She was 38 years old, and she made a sound a child makes. They stood in a hallway on the 22nd floor, and neither one of them said anything for a long time, and Emmett Rooker turned around and looked very hard at a piece of wall. I kept the number. That's what Odessa said first. They were sitting on the sofa. The tote bag was on the floor. Emmett had made coffee because making coffee was a thing his hands could do, while his chest did something else. What? The house phone. Odessa held her cup in both hands. 12 years. They kept sending letters switch to the cheap plan. Get the cell package, $30 a month, you'd save. I said no. Mom. Because that was the number you knew. Adair put her cup down. Her hand wasn't steady. And if you ever called and it rang somewhere else, Odessa shrugged one shoulder, a small motion. You'd have thought I moved. You'd have thought I didn't want it. You paid 12 years of $11 extra a month. Odessa looked into her coffee. That's the cheapest thing I ever bought. Adair Kerrigan put her face in her hands. He told me you'd embarrass me. It came out of her, all at once, ugly, the way things come out when the seal breaks. He sat me down in a restaurant, and he said, "Clients talk." He said somebody would ask what my parents did. And I was 26, and I believed him. Mom. I believed him, and I stopped calling, and it wasn't slow, because I was busy. It was slow on purpose. I planned it so it wouldn't look like anything. Ada. And Dad died, and I found out 3 weeks later. Ada. And I have thought about that every single day for 7 years, and I couldn't call, because if I called, I'd have to tell you why. ADA. Adair stopped. Odessa Purcell set down her cup. You want to know what I thought? Mom. On 12 years. You want to know what I actually thought? Or do you want to keep telling me what you did? Silence. I thought, Odessa said, that my girl was in trouble. Adair's face came apart. Because I know you. I have known you since you were 4 hours old, and you would not take the bottle. Odessa's voice was flat and level and absolutely certain. You never once in your life walked away from something you were proud of. You only ever walked away from things you were ashamed of. Mom. So I knew somebody had you. She reached over and took her daughter's hand. I didn't know his name. I didn't know what he had. I just knew somebody had my kid. And I couldn't get to her. And I have been sitting in that house for 12 years with a phone I wouldn't change. She turned Adair's hand over. So don't you sit there and apologize to me. I have to. You don't. And for 1 second, the flatness cracked. You don't. Because I'm your mother, and you were 26, and a grown man went hunting. Adair broke, and Odessa Purcell held her daughter on a white sofa in an apartment she'd never seen, and looked over the top of her head at the man standing in the kitchen doorway with a dish towel in his hands. She held his eye for about 4 seconds. She didn't say anything. She just nodded once, which was, if you knew her, the entire conversation. At 6:48, Loretta Adeyemi's car pulled into the garage. She got out with a banker's box under one arm, and behind her came a woman Emmett had never seen. 50s, navy suit, the kind of stillness that people mistake for calm right up until it isn't. Ms. Kerrigan, this is Assistant United States Attorney Thea Whitfield. Ma'am. Ms. Kerrigan. The handshake was brief. I want to be extremely clear with you about what I am and am not doing this morning. Okay. I am not making an arrest. I'm not making a promise, and I'm not your lawyer. I'm attending a private meeting as a guest of counsel, and I'm going to sit in the back, and I'm going to listen. She looked at Adair over her glasses. If nothing is said that concerns my office, I'll shake your hand and leave, and this will have been a wasted morning. And if something is said, then I'll ask for copies. That was it. That was the whole thing. Emmett had expected, he didn't know what he'd expected. Handcuffs in a hallway, something with more noise in it. And that's the movies, Rooker. In the real world, a woman in a navy suit says, I'll ask for copies, and that's the sentence that ends a man. Whitfield turned to Loretta. You said 400 pages. 411. Generated by the building's own system. Automatic footer. Time-stamped. Untouched. Thea Whitfield's expression did not change at all. Good, she said. At 6:56, they rode up. Adair, Loretta, Corinne, who had not slept and whose hands had not stopped shaking. Whitfield in the back corner. Odessa Purcell in the middle, in a cloth coat holding a canvas tote bag. And at the last second, at the 12th floor, Emmett Rooker stepped back toward the wall. I did it without thinking. 28 years of doing it. This was the executive floor. This was the room he entered with a ladder and a screwdriver and left before anyone came in. Adair caught his sleeve. No. Adair, don't. I don't even work here anymore. Literally. I am not. You come in. She turned around. You sit directly behind me, because I am going to say things in that room I have never said out loud, and there is going to be a moment where I need to turn around and see your face. Adair, you're the person who made me believe I wasn't alone. Her voice did not shake. Not once. I wrote that on a form when I thought I was dying. I'm not leaving you at the door now that I get to live. The doors opened, and Emmett Rooker walked into the boardroom of Kerrigan Vantage at 7 a.m. in a clean flannel shirt, and sat down in the chair directly behind the chief executive and folded his rough hands in his lap. 12 seats at that table. 11 of them were going to decide something this morning, and the 12th was Preston Vale. He was already there. Of course he was. He'd been there since 6:15, working the room, and Emmett could read it in the geometry, the way 3 board members wouldn't meet Adair's eyes, the way the coffee service had been moved to Preston's end, the way the temperature of a room tells you who's been talking. He stood when she came in. Adair. Warm. Wonderful. A performance in 3 acts. I'm so relieved you felt well enough to join us. After what happened, we were all so worried. He spread his hands. But I'm afraid we have some very difficult things to discuss. Questions about leadership. About stability. About whether this company can afford a chief executive who collapses under pressure at the most critical. He stopped, because he had just noticed Corinne Ledger standing against the wall. And then the woman in the navy suit. And then, at the far end, an older woman in a brown cloth coat holding a canvas tote bag sitting in a chair against the window, who was looking at him with an expression he could not immediately identify. Something moved behind Preston Vale's face. It was there for about 1/3 of a second. Adair did not sit down. She stood at the head of that table and let the silence go long, and Emmett watched her draw one breath, and he knew exactly what she was standing on the edge of. 12 years. Then she jumped. Before this board discusses my leadership. Her voice went out across that room, clear as a bell. There's something all of you need to know. Something I should have said a long time ago. And I'm going to say it myself this morning, before anyone else in this room gets the chance to tell you their version of it. Preston's smile flickered. Adair, I don't think this is... 12 years ago. Louder, straight over him. When I was 26 years old, I was engaged to a man of 38, who worked at the same firm I did. The room went absolutely still. That man convinced me to sign 22 pages of documents. I did not know what they were. I trusted him. I loved him. And they were fraudulent. Somebody's pen stopped moving. He engineered the entire structure so that if anyone ever went down for it, it would be me. My signature. My name. Preston was on his feet. She's clearly unwell. She's had a cardiac event. Sit down, Preston. You cannot seriously sit down. And 12 years of swallowed rage came out of her all at once, and it put him back in his chair. 6 months before I signed anything, Adair said, that same man took me to dinner and told me my mother would embarrass me. Nobody breathed. She cleaned office buildings. Night shift. 18 years, 2 jobs to put me through school. And he told me that if I was serious about the life we were building, I'd have to be careful about her. Her voice did not break, and I was 26, and I believed him, and I stopped calling my mother. She turned her head. I stopped calling her for 12 years. And at the end of the room, an older woman in a cloth coat sat perfectly straight and did not move a muscle, and every person at that table turned to look at her and understood all at once who she was. Ambrose Pike, 71, took his glasses off. 4 years ago, Adair said, that same man came to me in this building. He put a briefcase on my desk, and he told me that unless I gave him a seat on this board and a percentage of everything I had built, he would release those documents and destroy me. She looked down the length of the table, and I was so ashamed of what you would all think of me that I paid him. Her voice finally moved. 4 years. I let a man who committed a crime and hung it on a 26-year-old sit at this table and collect dividends off my company because I could not stand the thought of any of you knowing where I came from. She straightened. His name is Preston Vale, and he's sitting at this table right now. The room erupted. And here's the moment. Emmett watched it come the way you watch a wave stand up. Because Loretta had said it at 4 a.m. with her glasses off. He'll reach for the sword. He has to. It has worked every single time for 12 years, and men like that don't learn new moves. And Preston Vale cornered exposed, watching the whole table turn against him, in real time reached for the sword. You want to talk about the truth. He stood. And the smooth was gone, completely gone, and what was underneath it was cold and small and had been waiting the entire time. Fine, let's talk about the truth. Preston, I have the documents, Adair, every single page, with your signature on all of them. Federal securities fraud. He put his knuckles on the table. And if this board removes me, if you push this 1 inch further, those documents go to the SEC, to the press, and to the United States Attorney's Office by close of business today. He leaned in. So think very carefully about what you say next, because I can end you with 1 phone call. And every person in this room just heard you admit you signed them. Silence. And from the back of the room, a quiet voice. I'm sorry. Everybody turned. Thea Whitfield stood up. She was not in a hurry. She opened her jacket and clipped inside. It was a federal identification. Did you just say you've been in possession of evidence of a federal crime for 4 years and using it to extort a board seat and company profits from Ms. Kerrigan? Every drop of color went out of Preston Vale's face. Who? His voice cracked on the first word, and he had to start again. Who is this? This is a private meeting. Assistant United States Attorney Thea Whitfield. Pleasantly. I'm here as a guest of Ms. Kerrigan's counsel. She nodded toward Loretta Adeyemi, who gave Preston Vale a small, terrible smile. And I'd like to make sure I heard you correctly, Mr. Vale. Because what you just described, withholding evidence of a crime and using it to extract money and position from another person over a period of years. She tilted her head. That's not one crime. Nobody in that room moved. Would you like to say it again? I want to be sure I have it right. And Emmett Rooker watched a man understand in real time that he had walked directly into a trap, and that he had built it himself, out of his own arrogance, brick by brick, over 12 years of nobody ever telling him no. That's no. That was... Preston was backpedaling now fast, and sweat had come up along his hairline. That was rhetorical. I misspoke. I don't have any such documents. She's lying. This is a setup. You said you had every single page. Ambrose Pike spoke without raising his voice at all. We all heard you. You said the SEC. You said the press. Ambrose, don't. And as to those documents, Loretta Adeyemi stood up, and she took her time about it. "Mr. Vale, I want to encourage you to send them wherever you'd like. Please do. Send them to the SEC. Send them to the Wall Street Journal. Send them to your mother." She set a single sheet of paper on the table. "Because the criminal statute of limitations on the alleged conduct expired more than 6 years ago, those pages cannot be used to charge my client with anything by anyone in any jurisdiction in this country." She let that sit for exactly 1 second. "They're paper. They've been paper for 6 years. Preston Vale said nothing. "You have been holding a gun to this woman's head," Loretta said, "for 12 years, and it has been empty for half of them. And you knew. And you bet your entire life on the certainty that she was too frightened to ever look." She smiled. "Well," she looked. And then Corinne Ledger stood up. 34 years old, shaking so hard she had to put one hand on the back of a chair. Preston turned, and for the first time that morning, Emmett saw something in the man's face that was not calculation. It was fear. Corinne, sit down. 9 years ago, I was an intern at your firm." Her voice cracked. "I was 25. Corinne, you have had photographs of me for 9 years, and for 3 years you have been calling me and asking me what's on Ms. Kerrigan's calendar. Her travel, her doctors, her medications." She was crying, and she did not stop. "You asked me where a 9-year-old goes to school." Somebody at the table made a sound. "And I told you, and I didn't know why." She put her phone on the table. "I recorded all of it." The room did not move. 141 calls. Her voice steadied on the number the way people's voices do when they get to the part they've rehearsed for years. 3 years. Ohio is a one-party consent state. I looked that up when I was 25. I've Mr. Vale because you scared me that badly at 25. Thea Whitfield reached into her bag and took out a legal pad. She did not say anything. She just started writing. And then Emmett Rooker stood up. Every head in that room turned, and he felt it, and he did not care, even slightly. He walked to the table with a banker's box. "That's a phone," he said. "A phone's a voice, and a voice can be argued with." He set the box down. This is the building." He opened it. 411 pages. Every after-hours badge swipe in this tower for 6 years. Printed from the terminal in the basement records room. Automatic timestamp, automatic footer, nobody's hand on it. He put one page on the table in front of Ambrose Pike. "Mr. Vale's badge is on 406 of those lines." He put down a second page, and 91 of them land inside 9 minutes of a phone call on that woman's phone. Thea Whitfield stopped writing. "Mr. Rooker, ma'am, was that log generated by you personally?" "Yes, ma'am. 2:40 in the morning. It's got my whole name on the bottom of every page." He looked at it. Rooker Emmett J. Facilities. And in a room full of people who had walked past him for 3 years, a man said his own name out loud. Ambrose Pike put his glasses back on and read the page. Then he took them off again and stood up. "Vale. Ambrose, you've known me 11 years. "I have." The old man folded his glasses. "Which is why I want you to understand that I am the person at this table who feels the worst this morning." He looked at Adair. "Because I sat 8 feet from you for 4 years, and I thought you were cold." "Ambrose, I told my wife you were cold. I said that woman doesn't let anybody in." His jaw worked. "And it turns out there was a man at this table with his hand around your throat the entire time, and I was too busy admiring the view to notice." He turned back to Preston. "She just told this whole room the worst thing that ever happened to her. out loud, in her own words, with her mother sitting by the window. He put one finger on the table. There's a word for that veil, and it isn't fraud. Silence. It's courage, which is more than I can say for a man who spent 4 years bleeding a woman he claimed to have loved. He sat down. I move for immediate removal. Second, said the woman to his left before he'd finished the sentence. Preston Vale looked around that table. 11 faces, and every single one of them had in the space of 9 minutes turned to stone. You people are making a mistake, he said. Do you have any idea who I... And that was when the woman in the brown cloth coat stood up. Odessa Purcell had not said one word all morning. She had sat in a chair by the window with a canvas tote bag on her lap, and she had watched, and she was 64 years old, and about 5'3", and every person in that room turned to look at her. She walked the length of the table, slowly, because of her hip. She stopped 4 feet from Preston Vale. You told her I'd embarrass her. He didn't answer. Look at me. He did. I cleaned buildings for 31 years, Odessa said. Nights mostly. Buildings like this one. And I want to tell you something I learned because I don't think anybody ever told you. Her voice was completely level. I have been in 1,000 offices at 2 in the morning, and you can tell everything about a man from what he leaves on his desk when he thinks nobody's coming. She looked at him a moment longer. You'd have walked past me 100 times and never seen my face. She picked up her tote bag. Well, you've seen it now. And she turned around and walked back to her chair and sat down. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Then Ambrose Pike said very quietly, all in favor. 11 hands. Preston Vale was escorted out of the building 11 minutes later. Not by police. That's not how it goes. It was 2 men from building security and a woman from HR with a laptop, and he walked between them down the same glass hallway a maintenance man had once run down with a dying woman in his arms. And Thea Whitfield walked 8 feet behind him with a legal pad. That was all. That was the whole thing. I didn't look powerful. He looked like exactly what he had always been, a man who had built an entire life on other people's fear, watching it come apart the moment. 2 women stopped being afraid at the same time. He was indicted 4 months later. It turned out that once federal prosecutors began pulling on a thread belonging to a man who had been comfortably breaking the law for 2 decades, the whole garment came apart in their hands. There were others. There were in the end 6. Thea Whitfield called Adair personally to tell her. 3 of them came forward in the first month. 2 more after that. Because of me. Because you said it first. A pause. Ms. Kerrigan, they were all afraid of exactly the same thing you were. And every single one of them told my office the same sentence. I thought I was the only one. Adair Kerrigan sat very still for a long time after that call, and then she went and found Emmett, who was in her kitchen fixing a cabinet hinge, because he could not be in a room with a broken thing and leave it broken. She put her arms around him from behind and pressed her face between his shoulder blades. 6 people. Yeah. 6 people I'll never meet get to stop being afraid. Her voice went, and I only stopped because a man walked into my office at midnight and asked if I'd eaten. Emmett turned around in her arms. See, now you keep saying that. Because it's true. You stood up in that room. Emmett. No, listen to me. He held her by the shoulders. You stood up in that room and told everybody there, the worst thing in your life, with your mother, sitting by the window. I didn't do that. Loretta didn't do that. All I ever did was ask about a sandwich. Stop. Adair, stop. She took hold of his shirt. Don't do that thing where you make yourself small. You've done it the entire time I've known you, and I am finished letting you. She looked up at him. You didn't ask about a sandwich. You saw a person that 900 other people in that building looked straight through. Her voice steadied. That's not small. That is the largest thing anybody has ever done for me. They asked him to come back. Of course, they did. Ambrose Pike drove to the apartment himself, 71 years old, up 2 flights of stairs, and sat at Emmett Rooker's kitchen table, and apologized for a termination he'd had nothing to do with. Emmett said yes, with one condition. Name tags. Ambrose blinked. I'm sorry. Facilities Custodial Food Service Security. Emmett pushed a piece of paper across the table. Everybody in that building gets a name tag with their whole name on it. First and last. Not initials, not maintenance, not a department code. That's Mr. Rooker. That's the condition. That's the condition. May I ask why? And Emmett Rooker thought about a 9-year-old's construction paper report and a man named Reginald Osgood, who had emptied trash cans at an elementary school for 22 years and had gone quiet when a child asked him his whole name. Because a person you can't name, he said, is a person you can walk past. They went back to the hospital in the spring, the 3 of them, Emmett Adair and Wren, who had insisted on wearing a dress and then complained about it in the car for 11 minutes. They found her at the nurse's station on the 4th floor, reading glasses on a chain. Ms. Wilder? Constance Wilder looked up, and it took her a second, and then it didn't. You're the man who never left. Adair stepped forward and took both her hands. You handed him a clipboard. Honey, I hand out about 40 a day. You handed him mine. And Adair Kerrigan, in the fluorescent light of a 4th-floor nurse's station, said, There was a line on it. I filled it out one night, months earlier, alone at 3 in the morning, when I thought I might be dying, and I couldn't think of a single name to write down. Constance Wilder went very still, and he read it. Ma'am, and everything that happened after my mother, that man, all 6 of them, every single bit of it, came out of 6 words on a form you handed a man in a hallway. She squeezed her hands. I wanted you to know what that clipboard did. Constance Wilder took her glasses off. 20 years, she said. 20 years I've been handing those out. She wiped her eye with the back of her wrist. And I have never once known what anybody wrote on them. He proposed on a Tuesday. Badly. On purpose. No orchestra. No rooftop. No ring and a dessert, because Emmett Rooker understood the woman he was asking and understood that the entire point of the 2 of them was that it had never once been about the grand version of anything. Wren carried out a plate. On the plate instead of dinner was a modest ring. Dad picked it, she announced. But I picked the plate, and I have to ask because Dad said you'd say yes faster if I did it. Adair already had her hands over her mouth. Wren read carefully off a folded piece of notebook paper. Will you be in our family for real? Dad says you already are. But we should make it, she squinted, official. So there's paperwork? She looked up, because Dad said the last time there wasn't any paperwork, and that was the only thing missing. They were married in October. Small. Because a woman who could have filled a cathedral with important people wanted only the ones who actually showed up when it counted. Ambrose Pike gave a toast that went 11 minutes long. Loretta Adeyemi cried and claimed it was allergies. Verna Pruitt, Dorothea Kwan, Marguerite Boscovich, and Hazel Rooney sat in a row at the front like a tribunal, and Hazel wrote the whole thing down in a spiral notebook. Constance Wilder came in her good coat. Odessa Purcell walked her daughter down the aisle. She'd moved to Cleveland in June, into a place 11 minutes away, and she had a key, and she used it constantly, and Adair had cried the first time she came home and found her mother in her kitchen, making a pot of something. Wren was the flower girl and took the job with crushing seriousness, inspecting each row to confirm the petals were evenly distributed. And here's the last thing. Adair started something that year. Quietly, the way she'd learned to do good things from a man in a flannel shirt. A fund that paid for legal help for people held hostage by somebody with more power than they had. She didn't put her own name on it. She called it the Purcell Fund. Odessa found out from a newspaper. She called her daughter at 9 in the morning, and neither one of them could speak for about 40 seconds. "You gave it my name." "I gave it back your name, Mom." "Ada. I took it off myself when I was 26 because a man told me to." Adair looked out the window of an office where a heater still sat under the desk, unplugged, now still there. "I'm putting it back where it belongs. And on the hard, because there are still hard days. Life doesn't stop being life. Just because you found the right person, Emmett would come find her wherever she'd gone quiet. And he'd sit down next to her. And he'd ask the same 4 words he asked a crying woman in a corner office at 11:52 on a Tuesday night. "You eat today." And every single time it made her cry a little, and then laugh, and then lean into him. Because those 4 words had become the entire language of them. Shorthand for "I see you. I've got you. You are not alone anymore, and you are never going to be again." Emmett Rooker walked into that building 3 years believing he was invisible, and he walked out of it married to the one person who had seen him the whole time. Adair Kerrigan built an empire so she would never need anybody. And the strongest thing she ever did was let one ordinary man carry her when she fell. And on the last day of that year, in a stairwell of a tower in Cleveland, a woman named Odessa Purcell stopped in front of a maintenance worker she'd never met, read the tag on his shirt, and said, "Good morning, Reginald." And a man who'd been mopping that landing for 11 years looked up. Because everybody